Welcome to Heartline Stories. Today's story follows Sarah thought her life was complete raising little Ethan, the boy she found abandoned. But when she discovers the truth about his father, everything changes. Robert, a millionaire, is Ethan's biological dad, and he's been looking for him for years. When Sarah and Robert meet, sparks fly, but so do challenges. Can Sarah let go of the boy she raised, or will this unexpected family dynamic tear them apart? Watch as secrets unfold and hearts are tested. This is a story of love, family, and tough decisions. Don't miss what happens next, and let us know where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories. It was a rainy morning when Sarah Mitchell found the tiny baby left on her doorstep. She had just turned 30 and lived alone in a small house in a quiet neighborhood in Chicago. Sarah worked as a school teacher and had always dreamed of having a family. But that morning her life was about to change forever. As she opened the door to get her morning paper, she saw a small basket covered with a blanket. Inside there was a baby, no more than a few weeks old. The baby was crying, hungry, and scared. "Oh my goodness," Sarah gasped, her heart racing. She quickly scooped the baby up into her arms, holding him gently. The baby stopped crying as she rocked him back and forth, soothing him with her soft voice. The basket had a note attached to it, written in hurried handwriting. "Please take care of him. His name is Ethan. I can't keep him, but I know you'll love him." Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she read the note. She didn't know who the baby's parents were or why they had left him on her doorstep, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to turn her back on this innocent little child. Without a second thought, Sarah took the baby inside, fed him, and called her doctor friend to make sure Ethan was healthy. She made sure to give him all the love and care she could. Even though Sarah didn't have a lot of money, she was determined to raise Ethan the best she could. As the months went by, Sarah and Ethan became inseparable. She took him everywhere, at the park, to her school, even to grocery stores. Everywhere they went, people would smile at the sight of Sarah and her little boy, and Ethan started to grow into a happy, curious toddler. But one afternoon, things took an unexpected turn. Sarah was at the local grocery store with Ethan when she bumped into a man in the produce aisle. The man looked familiar, but Sarah couldn't place him. He was tall, with sharp blue eyes and neatly combed hair, wearing a tailored suit that looked like it belonged in a magazine. He smiled at her, his gaze shifting to Ethan, who was sitting in the shopping cart, chewing on a cookie. "Excuse me," the man said politely. "I couldn't help but notice your son. He looks exactly like my nephew." Sarah was taken aback. "Your nephew?" she repeated, confused. The man nodded. "Yes, my name is James Morgan. I work with my brother, and my nephew is around the same age as your little boy. His name is Ethan as well." Sarah felt her heart race. Could it be? Could this man possibly know something about the baby she had raised? "I'm sorry, but my Ethan doesn't have any relatives," Sarah said, her voice soft but firm. "I found him abandoned on my doorstep a year ago." James looked stunned. "You found him?" His eyes widened and he stepped a little closer. "Is it possible that this is the same child? My brother's son went missing a year ago, and we've been looking for him ever since. He was kidnapped when he was just a baby." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. "Kidnapped?" she repeated in disbelief. James quickly explained that his brother, a successful businessman named Robert Morgan, had been devastated when his son, little Ethan, was taken from their home. They had searched for months, hiring private investigators and offering rewards, but they had never been able to find the child. They had almost given up hope. As James spoke, Sarah began to feel dizzy. She thought back to the note on the basket. The note had mentioned how the baby's family couldn't keep him. Could this be true? Was Ethan really the missing son of a millionaire? "I need to take you to my brother, Sarah," James said, his voice calm but urgent. "He needs to meet Ethan. There's no mistake. This boy is his son." Sarah's mind raced as she tried to make sense of everything. What did this mean for her and Ethan? Could she really give up the child she had raised for the past year? Would Ethan want to be with this family? And what about her own feelings? Could she even imagine life without him? "I don't know what to think," Sarah said, shaking her head. "Ethan is my son. I've raised him. He's all I've known for the past year." James placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I understand, Sarah, But we need to get to the bottom of this. Ethan deserves to know the truth. Sarah took a deep breath and glanced at Ethan, who was happily munching on his cookie, unaware of the storm that was swirling around him. Her heart ached at the thought of losing him. But at the same time, she knew that Ethan deserved answers. He deserved to know where he came from. With a heavy heart, Sarah agreed to meet Robert Morgan, the millionaire father. She didn't know what would happen next, but she had a feeling that everything in her life was about to change. James offered to drive Sarah and Ethan to his brother Robert's mansion. The drive was quiet, filled with tension, as Sarah's mind raced with questions. What would she say to Robert? How would Ethan react to a family he had never known? And most importantly, how would she feel when faced with the reality that the little boy she had raised might not stay with her forever? When they arrived at the massive gate of the Morgan estate, Sarah's heart began to pound. The mansion was even grander than she had imagined. Tall iron gates opened, and James led them up a long, winding driveway to the front door. Robert Morgan was waiting inside. Robert, a tall, serious-looking man with graying hair, greeted them at the door. He was dressed in a sharp suit, but his face softened when he saw Ethan in Sarah's arms. The sight of the little boy stirred something deep inside him. "This is Ethan," Sarah said, her voice shaky. "I found him a year ago. I've been raising him as my own." Robert nodded but didn't speak right away. He kneeled down to Ethan's level, who, curious as always, stared at him with wide, innocent eyes. It was as if Ethan could sense that this man was important. Robert reached out a hand, gently brushing Ethan's cheek. "You have my son's eyes," Robert whispered, almost to himself. "You look so much like him." A lump formed in Sarah's throat. She watched Robert, her heart torn between wanting to protect Ethan and the desire to help this family find their lost son. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but she knew that everything was about to change. "You must have a lot of questions," James said, breaking the silence. "But we need to get to the bottom of this, Sarah. We have the resources to find out everything." "Ethan was taken from us when he was a baby," Robert explained softly. "My wife and I were devastated. We never stopped searching for him, but we couldn't find any trace of where he went." His voice broke, and he took a deep breath. "It's been a nightmare." Sarah felt sympathy for Robert, but also couldn't help the strong bond she had with Ethan. She had loved him as her own, and the thought of handing him over to a stranger made her stomach turn. "I'm sorry," Sarah said, her voice trembling, "but I've raised him. He's my son now. I don't know if I can let him go." Robert stood up, his expression pained. "I understand, Sarah. But this isn't just about us. Ethan deserves to know the truth. His life is meant to be much bigger than this. He has a family that's been waiting for him, and he's entitled to that chance." Sarah stood there, unsure of what to do. She glanced at Ethan, who had started to play with a small toy that was lying on the floor. How could she explain all of this to him? What would he think when he found out the truth? Would he want to stay with her or go with Robert? Before she could speak, James spoke again. "Sarah, I know this is difficult, but you've given Ethan love and care, and I can't take that away from you. We just want him to know who he is." "I know," Sarah said, wiping away a tear. "I want him to know too. But I'm his mother now. I raised him." "I understand," Robert said softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "And we'll never forget what you've done for him. You'll always be a part of his life." The room grew quiet as Sarah thought about what Robert had said. She knew it wasn't going to be easy. Ethan would have a whole new life, one filled with wealth and luxury. But that didn't mean she wouldn't be a part of it. She couldn't imagine leaving him forever, but she also couldn't deny the truth. He had a family out there, one that loved him and was waiting for him. Before she could say another word, Ethan looked up at her and smiled, his little face lighting up with joy. "Mommy," he said softly, his voice sweet and innocent. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. He called her Mommy. That was the word she had always hoped to hear, and now hearing it from Ethan filled her heart with love and sadness all at once. She took a deep breath and looked at Robert, her voice steady but full of emotion. "I can't just walk away. I love him too much." Robert nodded, his eyes showing understanding. "I know, Sarah, and you won't have to. We can figure this out together. Ethan deserves to know both his families, and we'll find a way to make that work." With those words, Sarah felt a small glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way for them to both be a part of Ethan's life. She didn't have all the answers, but she was willing to find a way forward, one that would be fair to everyone involved. The following weeks were filled with difficult conversations and emotional moments as Sarah, Robert, and James tried to figure out what was best for little Ethan. They met often, discussing their options and how to move forward. Robert and Sarah agreed that Ethan deserved to know both sides of his family, but no one had any idea how to balance the differences between Sarah's humble life and the luxurious world the Morgans lived in. Robert wanted to take Ethan to live with him at the Morgan estate, but Sarah wasn't ready to let go just yet. She had raised Ethan, loved him, and built a life for him. The thought of him growing up without her was unbearable. At the same time, she didn't want to stand in the way of his chance to know his biological father. One day, as Sarah was sitting at home, holding Ethan in her lap and playing with his tiny hands, her phone rang. It was Robert. "Sarah," Robert said, his voice filled with concern. "I've been thinking a lot about this situation. I don't want you to feel like I'm trying to take Ethan away from you. I know that you love him, and that's the last thing I would ever want to take from you. But I also believe Ethan deserves to experience both of his worlds." Sarah sat quietly for a moment, Ethan tugging at her shirt as he babbled. She couldn't help but feel a knot tighten in her chest. "What are you saying, Robert?" "I'm suggesting we try something a little different," Robert continued. "What if we share custody of Ethan? He could spend part of the week with you and part of the week with me. That way, he can know both of us and grow up with love from both sides." The idea of shared custody was one that Sarah hadn't considered. The thought of not seeing Ethan every day still hurt, but she also knew he deserved the opportunity to have a relationship with his father. Robert's suggestion seemed like a fair compromise, and she felt a small sense of relief. "I need to think about it," Sarah said softly. "I don't want to lose him, Robert, but if this is what's best for Ethan, then I'll try." "I promise you, Sarah," Robert said, his voice sincere. "I'm not trying to take him from you. I just want him to have everything, his heritage, his family, and the love we both have for him." As Sarah hung up the phone, she sat back in her chair. Ethan snuggled in her arms. She had spent so much time worrying about losing him, but maybe this was the solution. Maybe there was a way to keep him in her life, while also giving him the opportunity to connect with his biological father. The next few days were a whirlwind as Sarah and Robert worked out the details of their arrangement. They decided to begin slowly, with Ethan spending weekends with Robert and the rest of the week at Sarah's house. They also agreed to keep the lines of communication open, to make sure that Ethan's needs and feelings were always prioritized. The first weekend Ethan spent with Robert was difficult for Sarah. She missed his giggles, his small footsteps running around the house, and his warm hugs. But as the days passed, she realized that Ethan was adjusting to the changes. He loved spending time with Robert, but he also adored the time they shared together when he returned to Sarah's home. Over the next few months, things started to settle into a new routine. Ethan thrived with the love and care he received from both families. Robert and Sarah began to form a respectful bond, learning how to work together for the sake of the little boy they both cared for so deeply. One afternoon, while Sarah was sitting at her kitchen table, sipping tea and reading a book, she received another call from Robert. "Hey, Sarah," Robert said, his voice a bit hesitant. "I've been thinking, I want to do something special for you and Ethan. I know this hasn't been easy, and I appreciate how much you've opened up your heart to let me be a part of Ethan's life." Sarah smiled softly, not sure where this conversation was heading. "What do you mean?" "I'm planning a small family trip," Robert continued. "Just you, me, and Ethan. We could take a weekend getaway to a cabin in the mountains. It's a chance for us to bond as a family. No pressure, just time to relax and get to know each other better. I want you to know that I respect you, Sarah. I want us all to be a family." Sarah's heart swelled with emotion. She hadn't expected this. Robert wasn't just offering a weekend trip. He was offering her a place in his life, a real place, where they could share moments and memories as a family. "I'd like that," Sarah said, her voice soft but filled with warmth. "I think it would be nice for Ethan, too." They agreed on the details, and soon they were all on their way to the mountains. The cabin was tucked away in a peaceful valley, surrounded by tall trees and the sounds of birds chirping. It was the perfect setting for them to get to know each other without the pressures of their everyday lives. For the first time in months, Sarah felt a sense of calm. She watched Robert play with Ethan by the lake, laughing as they splashed in the water, and felt a small sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this new life they were building together would work. Maybe they could all find happiness, even in the midst of uncertainty. The weekend at the cabin turned out to be exactly what Sarah needed. It gave her a chance to see Robert in a new light, not just as a wealthy businessman, but as a loving father. She watched him with Ethan, and for the first time, Sarah truly believed that he cared for his son. Ethan was happy with both of them, and Sarah realized that this new family dynamic wasn't as impossible as it once seemed. As they sat by the campfire one evening, roasting marshmallows and laughing, Robert turned to Sarah. "Thank you," he said, his voice sincere. "Thank you for giving me the chance to be a part of Ethan's life. I know I can't replace the love you've given him, but I promise I'll be there for him. You don't have to worry about that." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. She had been so afraid of losing Ethan, but now she saw that he was surrounded by love, both from her and from Robert. Ethan had the best of both worlds, a loving mother who had raised him with everything she had, and a father who was eager to support him in every way. Sarah smiled and placed her hand on Robert's. "I just want him to be happy, Robert. I want him to know he's loved." Robert nodded, and the three of them sat in silence, watching the stars twinkle in the night sky. It felt like everything was falling into place. As time went on, their lives continued to adjust, but Sarah and Robert grew closer. They both respected each other's role in Ethan's life, and they found a balance that worked for them. Sarah would always be Ethan's first mother, the woman who had cared for him when no one else could. And Robert would always be his father, the man who would provide a future filled with opportunities. 1 year later, Sarah received a surprise invitation. Robert had planned a small ceremony to celebrate a new chapter in their lives. Ethan stood beside them, smiling brightly as they exchanged vows in a beautiful, simple ceremony in the same cabin where they had first bonded as a family. After the ceremony, Robert turned to Sarah with a smile, his eyes filled with affection. "You've given me a family, Sarah. I promise I'll never take that for granted." Ethan ran up to them, his little arms outstretched, and Sarah and Robert both bent down to lift him in the air, their hearts overflowing with love. Ethan had brought them together, and now they were a family, a real family. As they stood together, surrounded by friends and family, Sarah couldn't help but feel grateful for the unexpected journey her life had taken. She had raised Ethan as her own, and she had given him everything she could. But she had also found a partner who respected her and loved their son. It wasn't the life she had planned, but it was the one she would cherish forever.